would say it's a book about motherhood and mental illness and like living as working class in flyover country and crime, I guess. Yeah.
Okay. And
Mhm.
how did you arrive at this particular storyline? Like, what were some of the initial inspirations?
So when I was living in Denver still in 2015, before like I had a baby and like all that stuff. Because I think the last time we talked was like I think I had like a 1 year old or something. But when I was living in Denver a long time ago, this crime happened in the city I was living in, and I could not stop thinking about the story. And it wasn't like I saw it and I was like, "That's a book," you know. I just was more like, "How did this happen? How did this person like they faked a pregnancy for like 9 months and no one around her knew?" Like how did her community not see this? Like how did she fall through these cracks? Like that kind of thing. I was just like really obsessed with this concept. And then when I was living in Arkansas then in 2018, I was trying to write a different novel after Animals Eat Each Other came out, and it was just really hard. Like I just kept getting stuck in the middle and failing, and I didn't know what I was doing. And then I was like, I'm just going to like teach myself how to write a novel. Like how do people write novels, right? Like I'm going to read a craft book on it and figure it out. And just write like what I was gonna call like my really basic bitch novel because I just didn't feel like I was as sharp as I used to be because I had a newborn, and you know what that's like. You just get so tired, like you're not always with it. Um, and so I was like, maybe just having like a regular plot will be easy. And so because I could not stop thinking about this story, especially now that I was a mother, I just had this image in my mind. Like I knew like where the ending was, and so I was like, okay, I will just
So wait,
build.
just
Yeah.
so for people listening, so that they can follow, the story that you were fixated on was this story about a woman who fakes a pregnancy.
Yeah, yeah, yep, yep. The story about a woman who fakes a pregnancy. And so like I wanted to know and explore like what would compel someone to do that, what kind of circumstances could create this kind of situation, and the crime in particular, which I don't want to like necessarily give away, for people who want to like haven't read it or anything like that, is a very fringe kind of crime. It's very rare, and so I just wanted to like I don't know. I just wanted to understand it more, because it's so unique. Like it's so unique in that way. Like I was like, what drives people? What drives people to this particular kind of behavior? And can I construct a character that with empathy, and can I take people like on that ride with me? You know what I mean?
Well, and she narrates the book.
Yeah, 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 yeah. I had written it in third person as the first draft, and it didn't feel like close enough for me. Like I felt like it was just too distant, and so that's when I was like, I understand, like, because I love first person narration, and so then I kind of hit this point where I was like, I understand now, like, why I love first person so much is because it really does create, it like closes the gap between, you know, um, the character and the reader in a really deep way, and that was I knew I was like, that's the only way I'm going to be able to explore this person, like this character.
Daisy.
Yeah, Daisy.
Dee Dee.
Dee Dee. Yeah.
Yeah. It's a good, so I like that. I think that's a perfect name for her. And
Thank you.
this is, and you said earlier in terms of this being your attempt to write, what did you call it, a basic bitch novel? or,
Yeah, I
or
was
like
like, this
just,
is my basic bitch novel.
okay, but you're trying to, I kind of relate to this. You're trying to teach yourself how to write a novel. Like, how do people do this? Like a plotted novel with some degree of like page turner ness to it. You
Hmm.
said you read a craft book. Did you?
I did. I read a lot of craft books.
Which ones were particularly helpful? Were there ones that you really learned something from?
Yeah, actually. I found this book at Goodwill for like $1 called The Plot Whisperer. And like that actually really helped me. It's a really deep breakdown of like the hero's journey, just very basic plot. But it also discusses like the three act structure, which like as a person who doesn't have an MFA, like I never really deeply studied English literature. Like I have a journalism like bachelor's degree, you know what I mean? But I was never like deeply studying like story structure. So this really broke it down in a way for me that I was like, oh, like this is how stories are constructed, you know? And I think like as people who love stories or even just anybody who experiences stories, we all have like a natural way that like everyone knows there's like a beginning, middle, and end. You know, that's kind of like it kind of comes like out just because we consume so many stories. But I didn't really understand like how those things were delineated. So that helped me actually think about how I'm going to construct a plot and how I'm going to get through the middle, because the novel I abandoned, I was just writing it like seat of my pants, like I had done with like all my short stories and with my first novel, but I kept getting stuck, you know, directly in the middle. It just started losing momentum and I didn't know where to go. And so learning how to actually figure out what a plot is and, you know, how to set like rising action and all these things, it really helped me like just create structure in a way that I hadn't done before. And then the other book that I read was hilariously 90-Day Novel, because, you know, Otessa Moshfegh talked about it when writing Eileen, and I was like, okay, I'm gonna kind of see what this is about. And it was some good advice, but like I think the way that the book was designed didn't work for me, but I liked the concept of trying to write a novel like in 3 months. You know, like I was like, I think that's a challenge that can be undertaken. So those two together, I spent like 2 weeks plotting, and then I spent 9 weeks just completing the first draft. And so I was like, okay, I'm really sold on this process. Like, you know, it can be bad, like letting it be bad, the first draft, and like all that kind of stuff. It helped me push me through it. So it did help. But hilariously, like now that I'm working on new projects, I still feel like I'm a beginner. It still feels like just as hard. Like every time you start a new project, you know.
It's a blank slate.
Yeah, every time.
And in terms of the 2-week plotting process, or that was like what, drawing up an outline?
Yeah, like I got this big thing of butcher paper and I taped it to my kitchen wall, and then I got like a marker and I just like delineated like all these major like points, right? And then I got like a bunch of sticky notes and I was like, okay, here's like the action, right? Like here are like the things that are happening. And then I delineated like the emotional plot lines, you know, like what is Daisy experiencing in this moment from this moment to that moment, you know? So I kind of went through that. And so those two things were on this big like thing like on my kitchen wall that I taped up. And so whenever I had like free moments, you know, like because I was staying home watching my daughter. She was around a year, maybe a year and a half. And so anytime I had like a free moment, or if she was napping, I would just like sit at my kitchen table and like look at my like plot, like, you know, and then I would just like hammer out what I could do. Like I would just try to do that as much as I could every day. And it was so helpful because if there were days where I was just like, I don't even know like what I'm going to do like today, like what am I going to write about? I have no idea how to like get through this scene. I would just in my mind just go from like A to B. Like you don't have to make it pretty, just like, you know, even just write like the way that the characters are getting from like these points, you know, because I could see on my plot like where I want it to go.
I should say too that plotting out this particular novel on butcher paper feels apropos.
It actually does. I did not consider that. No, it's true. It was a fun process though. I like having that big visual representation, you know, like I really want to do that again with my next projects. I just, like I haven't been as organized, I think, this time, but it's nice because you know, you just look at it, you're looking at it like every day. Like if you go into your kitchen, you're like, there it is. You're thinking about it. Even if you're not necessarily like working on it, you can still kind of like see it and be reminded like of what you're trying to complete, you know what I mean?
Yeah, that's like something that I have told myself that I should do, but I have never done. I have like the fantasy of like just like covering the wall like a conspiracy theorist with like paper and sticky notes and
Yeah,
photos. But
totally.
I'm sure it would be helpful. Maybe I will when I get around to writing my plotted novel, which I think is going to be not the next book, but the book after.
Yeah, yeah. I don't know. I really like it. I too, like, when I was like, okay, I'm ready for my next book project, I went out to a craft store and bought like a bunch of string because I was like, yeah, I'm gonna make it like conspiracy theorist looking. It's gonna be like, cool. Um, but I haven't done it yet either. So
Yeah. Well, what is it? What's holding us back? It's like maybe that makes it real or something.
I know. I don't know. Yeah. Do you find that you procrastinate on things, or is that just like a
Yeah, I mean, I
yeah?
think not everybody. There are some psychos out there, but like I think it's like I think it's easier to procrastinate when you don't have a firm grip on what you're doing.
Mhm.
It's easier to get down to business when you know where you're going, I think.
Yeah. No,
So
that's true.
it's like working in the unknown can be a little bit, you know, unpleasant and something that you would prefer to avoid.
That's because you have to like mark out the path yourself. Like you have to make a lot of decisions. And I think if you're like maybe it's like maybe, like for parents or people who have like really high pressure jobs, like things like that, you have to make so many decisions every day. So then when you're like, I have to make decisions for myself for a book that I want to write for me, like
Right.
that's too hard.
That's too much.
You know,
That's a
that's too
bridge too
much.
far. Yeah.
Yeah.
So this is a book. This is a story about Daisy or Dee Dee. And she is a woman in her 30s who is in a relationship with a man named David, who's kind of like a low level criminal. She
Hmm.
calls him daddy,
Hmm.
and he's super into exotic bugs. He's not the greatest guy in the world. I want to say there was a review that I read of the book when I was prepping that referred to daddy as like a disturbingly recognizable form of asshole or something. Like he's a kind of guy that is depressingly common in terms of
Mm.
his treatment of Dee Dee, his sort of self-absorption and lack of sensitivity. Uh, but they're in a relationship together, and she just desperately wants to have a baby and wants to be a mom. And something that you have said about not just this book, but I think your body of work is one thing that I'm always exploring, a theme that I'm constantly coming back to is desire, or just where the origin of suffering comes from. This
Mhm.
place of the gap between what you want and what you have, and how that, combined with feelings of alienation and society, affects people. That really sums it up for me. This is like a book about a deep desire and maybe multiple kinds of deep desire. And you're exploring, in particular with Dee Dee, what that is and where it comes from, right?
Yeah, 100%. 100%. I just always come back to that as a theme. I don't know why. You know what I mean? Like I think that for a while I was like not aware of the themes that I was always circling back to, but obviously now that like there's a kind of a body of work behind me, I'm like, oh, I am. Like I am always consistently somehow meditating on this process in some way. Um, I don't know why. Maybe it's just because like I think about suffering as a concept a lot, right? And this idea of like whether or not sometimes it's like the whole like artist trope where it's like if I give up my suffering, will I lose my creative capacity? Like that kind of idea. Or sometimes it's just like because suffering is inevitable, like it is always inevitable. Even if you're like completely healed as a person, like everybody still is going to come across this feeling, you know what I mean? Because like happiness isn't like a permanent state or anything like that, you know what I mean? And I think just because because that you like I feel everything, I'm super sensitive to everything all the time. So when I feel those things, I'm like, this is so hard, and my mind sometimes thinks like this is gonna last forever. Um, I am consistently just trying to understand like the nature of it. like I do, like I think we've talked about this before. Like I meditate and I read a lot of like, or listen to a lot of like Buddhist lectures, more so particularly like when I'm having a harder time, and
By whom?
so
Who are some of your favorites?
the first place I started was through Venerable Guan Chang, and like there's a 4-part series on dependent origination, the origin of suffering, that is on YouTube that it just transformed my life. Like I always go back to it just to revisit the basics.
Say the name again.
Guan Cheng, so it's Guancheng.
And the
Yeah,
dependent origination and the origin of suffering. So the interconnectedness of things and the
yeah,
origin of suffering.
yeah. And then it's like I couldn't name any other particular ones, but like, in college I read a lot of, what's her name? Pema Chodron, and like, I think Trungpa Rinpoche, like a lot of like the Zen stuff I've explored. Um, and then sometimes I'll just read like books by people I can't remember on things like, the Tibetan Chod rituals and like getting like really, really deep into like those kinds of like Buddhist mysticism and stuff like that too. Because that helps provide some insight to me about how like Buddhist thought is received in the West like versus the East, and trying to understand like, because it's different, like, and sometimes you see people kind of interpret things in a way that um maybe doesn't like work or seem correct. Like there's ideas between like, do we obliterate the ego or are we obliterating like ego clinging? Like those little differences just can help you. It helps me like understand and just deepen like what it is I'm trying to do, right? Like if I'm like in a meditation, or if I'm trying to like understand the origin of my suffering and then like sit with it or something. Do you know what I
That's in,
mean?
yeah, I do, and I think it's interesting that this is the like undergirding of
Yeah, yeah.
this novel and this
Hmm.
story, which has nothing explicitly to do with Buddhist psychology. I don't think it's ever mentioned in the story, and
No, yeah.
it is a book about the idealization of motherhood,
Hmm.
particularly in the Dee Dee character. She is a woman, as we've said, who desperately wants to be a mom and who has this idealized vision of what motherhood is and will be for her,
Hmm.
not only at the level of love and nurturing and caring and deep connection, but also in terms of it being a way out of the workforce, which, once you become a parent, you realize is sort of laughable. Parenthood is not a way out of work.
Yeah. Oh man, I know. I actually like I laugh at myself thinking about that like when I was younger, or like when I do see people say like I want to be like prairie core and like live in the woods and just have like babies and just do that, and I'm like, to escape my corporate job. And I'm kind of like, it's still, being a parent is actually like 24/7 labor in a way. It's
Yeah,
a labor of love, like it's deeply satisfying, but it is just like there's never really an off day.
right.
Like you can't
And
really
I
compare
understand,
the
but I
two.
understand. I mean, I
Yeah.
never heard Prairie Corps, but I understand this idea of wanting to escape the rat
Yeah.
race and live closer to nature. I have a lot of those little fantasies, like, in my head.
Mm.
I know it would not be what I imagine it to be. Like the reality's always like less sexy than the way that you envision it. But I get
Hmm.
that, and I think that Dee Dee is somebody who is, like so many of us, working a job that is bad for her spirit, and she knows it.
Hmm.
So much of work life is corrosive and toxic and misery making.
Hmm.
And this book draws that beautifully. And I should say, too, for people listening in particular who have not had a chance to read, that Deliver Me is a novel that exists in a world and features characters that are not seen often enough in fiction. This is a book that takes place in rural Missouri, correct?
Hmm. Hmm.
And features characters who are poor and like they're not college educated, I don't believe, and super religious. These are not the kinds of characters and the kinds of settings that you see often enough in contemporary literary fiction. And Dee Dee works in a meatpacking facility that I took to be the Tyson, because she works in a chicken on the chicken line, essentially butchering chickens and preparing chicken meat for sale, correct?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So talk a little bit about that. I know that you have some experience. You lived in the woods for a time in Northwest Arkansas, not far from the Tyson meatpacking plant, but I'm just curious to know how you got there and what it took to write those particular sections of the novel inside the meatpacking facility with what I took to be really terrific accuracy and a real sense of verisimilitude, a real gritty reality that those scenes have to them.
Mm-hmm. Well, so when I used to live in Colorado Springs, like when I was a teenager, and I read this book called Fast Food Nation by Eric Schlosser, and
Sure.
that was like the first time my eyes were kind of opened to what that level of industrial agriculture does to like animals in general and people. That meatpacking overall is one of the most dangerous jobs in the United States. And the companies are constantly lobbying against OSHA standards to increase their profits. And so for a long time, like, just as a like crusading like youth or whatever, I've just always disliked that industry. And I've thought about how it's difficult for people to try to live in harmony with their ideals, like cruelty-free meat, for example, or like something that reduces harm as much as possible, but also having to survive. Like not everybody has the privilege to like grow their own food or like have their own livestock or even go purchase like ethically raised meat or something or something like that, or even being a vegetarian. Like that's not always ideal for people who have like health issues for or who have a lot of mouths to feed or something like that. So it's like this balance that becomes very difficult between very affordable food and very like unsafe food. Unsafe meaning it's bad for both the animals and the people who work in the industry. So I guess I've always been interested in it in that way. And then when I did move to Arkansas, yeah, I lived in the woods for a while. I saw how people just would keep like their own chickens and stuff. Like if you would go walking around on these different plots of land, there would be a lot of people who just, they live very simply. Like you live in like your single or double wide and you have your yard, you have like an acre or two, you have like your little chicken coop, which seemed, it's like those kinds of things like seem idyllic. And it was nice to see in contrast with Tyson headquarters being right there in, I think the headquarters is in Fayetteville, Arkansas, which is like northwest Arkansas, and it kind of touches Missouri and Oklahoma. So that whole area kind of feels like a little bit similar. And yeah, I just did a ton of research. Like, we moved into a house eventually, and I had a backyard for the first time. And so then I was like, I want chickens. I was like, I want to, like, try my hand at this finally. And it was wonderful, like, just as, like, animals and, like, pets, like, keeping animals, they all have, like, their own little personalities. Like, it was nice to feel, like, connected to something that like, so we would get eggs every morning, like, that was nice, like, you're taking care of them, and then they kind of give to you. It's, like, this interesting symbiotic relationship. We never, like, ate the chickens, but I know people could do that, and so in some ways, like, that makes you feel more responsible, like, for the food that you're eating. So I don't know, that's just where a lot of that was born out of, is, like, that passion for understanding that cycle, and, like, maybe making people more aware of that. For the research, I don't know. I just like did a lot of late night like deep dives online a lot, trying to understand the industry practices, trying to find like believe like videos, not like, PETA propaganda videos, even though I know some of those probably have legitimacy, but I just was looking for like stuff that's like really even keeled, that just feels like normal, you know? I'm just trying to find as much as I could about that. And then from there, just trying to put myself like in that position. Like I've never worked as a butcher, but I've worked in like food service, like food preparation and stuff like that. So there's some of that kind of goes, the experience is a little bit transferable. And then just trying to take like feelings and experiences from like, yeah, being in Arkansas, being out in Arkansas. Like we had friends who, when we lived there, would go hunt wild hogs. So I could be there for the whole process of like watching this animal become like food for like an entire group of people, so like those kinds of things.
Which factor into the novel. There are really graphic and accurate seeming, because I've never done this, descriptions of butchery, like animals being butchered. Dee Dee's father was a hunter and would kill animals for food and kind of show her how he was butchering them. And those scenes are depicted with what felt to me like a lot of accuracy and a sense of reality. So it was the wild hogs in Arkansas that you saw your friends butcher that informed that?
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah. And then like obviously like anything that I don't know, I'm like researching to like fill in like, my own knowledge gaps and that kind of thing. But yeah, and it's a really like as a former vegetarian who was vegetarian for the reasons of like reducing that kind of harm like with industrial agriculture, it was really powerful to be able to see something that had lived wild, you know, didn't have to like live in a cage or, you know what I mean? Like that kind of thing. And then kind of be able to like honor that this living thing gives its energy so that you can have your energy and then you can give your energy out back into the world. Like when you see like that whole process, it was really grounding in a way, and it like made me respect what it is and how we consume things so much more. So that was like, a lot of that like kind of plays into representing the chicken factory in the novel, because I mean, as chicken especially, because one, it's like the dirtiest meat in the United States. Something like 25 to 30% of all chicken in the United States for sure has salmonella on it, right? Like it's just not like a very like safe like raw meat. But then when you see it in the supermarket, it's like beige. Like it's not even like the color of what you think of like meat to be, right? Like beef is like red, and that makes us think about like blood in a way, right? Or you cook steak rare or whatever. But chicken is like bloodless. It's like beige. It's like wrapped in plastic. It's very it can keep you like disconnected from like what it came from. Like what happened to that animal like before you ate it. And so it's easy to just not think about like what it's gone through to like get to you in a way. You know what I mean?
Sure. And
Yeah.
you were a vegetarian, but then you say you're no longer a vegetarian. Like what happened? Like what was the process of starting to eat meat again?
I started getting like a lot of health problems, not from being vegetarian, but just like I got an endocrine disorder, and it just made it really hard for me to eat a lot of starchy foods, which is a lot of like vegetarian stuff. And this was like back in the day before there's like so many more options now. Like there's so many more meat-free options now. So I was just like, I have to start like kind of switching things up again, because I just, I can't just eat like tofu forever. Like I have to eat like other like things that like felt filling for me. But living in the UK has actually been really nice because there's like a ton of vegan options everywhere. Because I think because there's like a very large like Hindu population, I don't think they eat beef and stuff, so there's always vegan and dairy-free options and stuff on like every single menu. And so I do find myself like drifting more towards like meat-free more easily, just not 100% of the time, but
Yeah. I get that. It's like it's hard to be 100%.
Yeah.
People who are like vegan, like don't wear leather, don't eat any animal products, no milk in the food. I mean, you have to really work, I think, to maintain that and to bat 1,000. And I want to ask you too, before we get too far along about this time you spent in Arkansas. We mentioned earlier this desire to sort of live off the grid and get out of the rat race. You actually did that. Like you were living in a cabin without utilities. Like I don't even think there was a toilet, right? Like there was no like plumbing.
Yeah, there's no plumbing. It was just like it's like a sawdust latrine, which was like, it's like living off grid for a while was really nice because you feel so accomplished at the end of the day, like your chores or what have you, like if you have to chop wood, or like clear out weeds of wherever you are, or go get like water. But when like it's your turn to like clean like the latrine out and go like find the place to like dump the stuff, you're just like, I don't want to do this. But you have to. No one else is gonna do it. You have to do it. It's all teamwork. And
you were there with your child?
No, I was there with my partner and my friends. My friends had owned this cabin they were building. And I'd met them. I was working at Whole Foods in the grocery department, and there was this girl who worked there. She was like at the cookie bar because we were working in a bakery, and she looked so cool. I was like, I'm gonna be friends with that girl. And then we started hanging out, and she was like, me and my husband are moving back to Arkansas in like 6 weeks. And she was like, if you guys just want, like, she was like, if you guys want to come out and stay, like, you can stay with us for a while. Just help us, like, build up our cabin or whatever. And so me and my partner were just like, okay, let's do it. We just wanted a change. Like, we wanted something different.
So wait, the Whole Foods was in Colorado?
Yeah, it was in Colorado.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so then you moved to Arkansas, to the Ozarks.
Yeah. And it was fun. Like, I learned how to insulate a roof, how to get clean water, how to make sure you don't, like, burn down your cabin when you have a wood stove, like, all of that, like, it was, I don't know, like, living in the absolute, like, dark, like, trying to, like, go down a path when everything's, like, super dark and all the trees are there, which I don't like this deep dark. It's scary, but yeah.
How long were you there?
We were there for just a couple of months, and then I got pregnant, and I was like, we can't live in a cabin with a baby. Like, we have to go to a town and get jobs and like get an apartment. You know what I mean? So that was when we were like, all right, let's make a couple changes.
Where did you go from there?
To Fayetteville, which is in northwest Arkansas. So it's only
university town.
Yeah, there's a university there. Like our first apartment was in Bentonville, which is like 40-minute drive from where we were staying in the woods, and that's like the headquarters of Walmart is there. And I just got a job at Starbucks because they give you health insurance even if you work part-time, which was nice. And then we just like built up, like we just like tried to figure out what we were gonna do, and then we moved to Fayetteville like a year after, and that's when we got a house, we had a backyard, and all that. So
the baby was born.
The baby was born. Yeah.
Okay.
So yeah.
All right. Well, I'm just curious because like anybody, I've had these fantasies. Like I'm just gonna go live somewhere in the sticks. Make it simple, but it's never as simple as you think it's going to be. Like I know. There are complexities to simplicity somehow. Like it's just inescapable.
Yeah. Well, and some people really do take to it. Like where the small like town where we were living, like in the woods, there were other people that kind of lived like in the hills. And there was one family that they like built their A-frame, because it's very simple, relatively simple if you have the DIY skills and the motivation to like build an A-frame. And they were a family of two, like they had 2 children, and they really they like really committed to that lifestyle and like lived off grid for like a long, they live off grid. I'm sure they probably still do for a long time. I met people who they had like built an earth ship. It's like that kind of house that's built from 100% recycled materials. And they have like 40 acres. Like some people really, you can just like commit to it, but I think it does take that probably a lot of patience with yourself because everything has to be DIY, right?
And you're home, and you're probably homeschooling your kids, and I mean, I
Yeah.
don't even know if you're that far out into the boonies.
Yeah, yeah. No, you're homeschooling. Yeah, you're homeschooling your kids, definitely.
That's
So
a lot of work. I mean,
it is a lot of work. It
parenthood's
is a lot
enough
of
work.
work. I
People who
know.
homeschool, I'm like, damn, that's just, you're really taking it on in that case. But
Yeah, but community is a lot stronger out there, I felt, than like if you're like kind of just like living, like alone as a parent in a city. Like for me, like I don't, I've never lived in a place where like, besides COVID, I've never had my parents around, like with caring for my daughter or anything like that. And I'm an only child, so like when I was out in the woods, people really seem to band together. They're always visiting each other. There's always help. They're always helping each other, trading supplies if they like need it. Childcare is very communal. I think that was like one of the best parts was getting to see and experience like so many like mothers before I had my own child, like how they handled their kids, how they worked together to take care of each other's kids. You know what I mean? Like that is really wonderful.
that's
So
lovely.
yeah.
So, Deliver Me is also a book that is often described as a novel concerned with body horror. What is it portrays? One of the reviews, it portrays a quote disgusting yet beautiful world, and I was like, I guess that's right. I mean, because there is a lot of beauty in the landscape, in the ways that you depicted in this novel. I think it kind of speaks to what we were just discussing, this time that you spent in the Ozarks. It's very beautiful there. And it's also kind of relentlessly gross in its depictions of, for example, food, animals, both dead and alive, the bugs, just like cigarette smoking, vomit, blood, kind of, I don't know how to describe it. I guess gross sex by most people's standards. I mean, no judgment, but like,
That is so funny.
there is, this is also a novel that is interested in weird kink. I hope it's not too much to share that the protagonist Dee Dee and her boyfriend Daddy have sex that involves exotic bugs. Like he's into that. Like involving like creepy, crawly, big, giant, like hairy insects, like praying manti. I mean, all this kind of stuff. I'm just like, for most people, that is more than a bridge too far. So can you just talk a little bit about that part of it? The body horror, the grossness, the bugs. Like, where does all of that come from?
Well, I think a big part of it is that like the human experience encompasses so much. And this is what I love about like horror in general. I don't think that I set out to write like a horror novel, but I adore horror like movies as like a genre, right? Because a lot of times what they show me is that when it's the stuff that's like that gritty realism stuff, is that like on one end of like the human experience spectrum, you have this like indescribable ecstasy that people can experience, right? And then on the other end, there's like this indescribable horror. And like it just feels like there's like this endless spectrum. Like the human experience can really be like anything. It's true, right? Like these are all things we have, like blood and vomit. Like it is, like it is gross, but it's like this fact of life that we have that I guess contrasts with like a lot of beautiful things, like looking at your baby and them like smiling at you. Like that's like this indescribable feeling of ecstasy, right? Like I can see you smiling right now thinking about it, right? You're like, it feels
Right.
so good. But
Yeah.
then there's like there's also still so much horror in the world. And so I guess that's maybe where and why, like, I just feel like the visceral details of things are so important. I've always written like from the body. It's how we experience the world. It's like that, that tool houses like our little brain, and this tool is how we like input things into the brain. That's how stories begin, right? So I guess just having that sensory detail has always been really important to me. It's almost like, I don't know. I guess sometimes I'm just like, how vivid can I make a thing? You know, can I bring someone into this fictive dream and actually put in their mind like what's in my mind? You know? So,
Is it, I hope it's not strange to say that I often laughed as I was reading this book when it came to the body horror stuff and how gross it could be,
oh,
just
interesting.
because I don't see this very often. I mean, it's kind of like that, like nervous laughter where you're like, oh, like, but I don't see this very often. And I think too, I was admiring the creative courage that you have in being willing to kind of go there. Like you permit yourself to go there in ways that like maybe a lesser writer wouldn't, they'd hold back or say to themselves like, this is too much.
Mm-hmm.
And I read somewhere that when you took this book out on submission for publication, that a lot of the major publishers who looked at it, declined to publish it on the grounds that it was too violent and too gross and intense. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think to a degree. I had feedback that was like, maybe not that direct, but it was like, one, I really actually really loved reading these rejections because it made me feel like good. They were actually nice. One was like, I've never had a book crawl under my skin like this, in a really long time. But like, we're just gonna have to pass because it's like not right for like the imprint or whatever. Or one was like, right, they were like, I could do without like the last like 40 pages, which is like the ending. And for me, I'm like the ending for me is like that's where I started. That's where I was always driving to. So I think it was just on the basis of that. And like it had some editorial feedback too about like some scenes that should maybe be cut or like, yeah, also like pulled back in that way. But they did feel for me like integral to the character itself. So
I don't get the sense in this novel that you pulled back all that much. In fact, I think like you sort of like doubled down. I see this every once in a while. Like not, and I don't know, every book is unique, but there are certain novels that I read where I'm like, wow, this is an author who, whenever it came to a moment where it's like, should I pull back or double down? They always double down. That's sort of how I felt in reading this, is that you are kind of what, like pushing the needle, trying to sort of take the reader into extreme places and to make the reader examine things that might be uncomfortable for them to examine. Like
yeah,
you want to look at this stuff. You want to sort
yeah,
of like zero in on it instead of kind of brushing past it.
yeah, I think so. Because I think another motivation for me, not that I was like, this is what I want readers to get from it, but why I was exploring it was just trying to understand like culturally the psychology of like killing, right? Like in terms of her working at the chicken factory and like what we consume and like maybe the kinds of things people will like put up with in their relationships or how people like in society like view death, right? Like there's a lot of obsession with true crime, like David in the book is constantly talking about like all these facts about death and like like the people who might
David being Daddy, her
daddy,
Dee
yeah,
Dee's
yeah,
boyfriend.
the boyfriend, yeah, yeah. Like watching a lot of right like true crime documentaries or serial killer documentaries or that kind of thing. Like there's all these different ways that like killing is kind of examined in the book, I guess based just on my own observations of society as well. So I think that was part of why too, you know. Yeah, I don't know. I'm like, why did I double down? I don't know. I just wanted to. It
Just
just
felt,
seemed
yeah.
necessary. It seemed like it just seemed important for like to explore that, like for the character itself. So
And when it comes to the bugs, you are a person I read who used to be spider phobic.
yeah, yeah,
And here you are now writing a novel where you know, like sex scenes happening involving insects. Like,
Mm-hmm.
how did you navigate that? I guess you're no longer spider phobic. You got over that. I mean, you would almost have to if you lived out in a cabin in the Ozarks, but how did it go away?
So my spider phobia went away when I started like seeing like I think they're called wolf spiders everywhere. It's just like your garden variety like spider. They just like to crawl around because they hunt. They don't necessarily stay in webs. Um and like I used to be the person that would kill them, but then I started feeling kind of bad about that. This was like even probably around the time that I quit being a vegetarian. I had this like idea in my mind where I was like, I kind of think all life exists on like the same like level. Like I don't think we should be like putting hierarchies to whether or not like a chicken is worth more than a spider or you know what I mean, or like a flower, like a tree or something like that, because it is kind of all life, like it's all symbiotic. And
What about,
so
wait.
mm,
What about mosquitoes? I have the same thought. I will take a bug out of my house. If I see a spider in my house, I will try to like get it into a cup or something and take it outside. But
yeah.
mosquitoes,
Well, I mean,
I
if it's like
am,
biting you, I guess yeah, like that makes sense.
yeah,
Um, or like if something's like, you know, venomous, it's gonna like hurt your kid. Like yeah, like it makes, you know, that makes sense. But like yeah, I remember talking to my friend Julia Escoria about spiders and like seeing them and like being really afraid of them. Like I used to not even want to go like, you know, go near them or anything like that. And she said something to me that was like I can't remember the exact phrasing of it, but basically like sometimes when you start seeing them a lot, what's happening is there's something like that your shadow is like trying to integrate, right? Or like it's trying to like alight you. Like there's something that's going on that you're feeling anxious about or that you need to like accept in yourself. And I just started thinking about that a lot. I do believe like we do pattern recognition for a reason. Like maybe not like God is sending you an omen, but more like I am noticing this pattern and this there's a reason I'm noticing that. But like what is that reason? Like can I pick up on that? Does that mean I think that I need to be examining something in myself, you know? Because I was like even having dreams about spiders and stuff. I wrote like a short story about it. And once she told me that, um, yeah, I don't know. I think it just actually put me at ease. Like I was like, okay, so maybe they are here for like a reason. Like I'm just supposed to be thinking about something in particular. And I stopped being so anxious about it. I kind of like began to sit with like that discomfort. And now even like if I see spiders, I don't even like move them. I just kind of let them do their thing. Like I just let them stay where they are. You know, like I don't
yeah,
know. There's not really any harm
yeah.
or
They're not going
anything
to
like
bother
that.
you. My wife
Yeah.
is My wife hates. She had a bad experience with spiders as a child, and is just wants nothing to do with them. And I'm like, just leave them alone. They're not going to bother you. There's not like a spiders don't like attack people unless
Yeah.
you like unless you step on them or something or put your hand in a spider web or something. Maybe you might get bit, but I don't know. But
Yeah.
I find it interesting that Julia Discoria, a past guest on this program,
Yeah.
essentially cured you of your spider phobia.
She did. I know. I think about it a lot. But what's interesting though is that like even though I'm like, okay, I can let them do their thing, you still have like this um visceral reaction to like if you've seen like those videos where someone will like touch like this thing that just looks like a glob and then it turns into a bunch of tiny little spiders. Like there's this thing in you that's just like that's bad, you know, like you feel like icky. And so I'm fascinated by that feeling because humans have this innate feeling about insects. And sometimes I think it's because they're so far away from the human form. Like we love jumping spiders because they have like eyes in the front of their head and they're kind of fluffy and they look a little bit like cats or puppies maybe. But like other types of bugs are like, I mean, they look horrifying, especially when they're like in these swarming kind of groups. It's like an innate thing. And so I'm fascinated by that relationship between like human psychology and bugs. I think that was one reason why I thought putting that storyline in there would be so interesting because it's like this deepest juxtaposition between like intimacy and closeness and then like the most terrifying alien shit, you know, that you can think of. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And in terms of being, I mean, we have discussed the spider phobia and its end, but in terms of things that gross you out, like, I think there are two ways of reading a novel like this. You can read it and think to yourself, well, the author clearly has like a super high tolerance for gross stuff and for like body stuff and all of it. Or I guess the other angle to take is that this is an author who is like super grossed out by this stuff and is kind of working it out on the page. Like, where do you fall? Are you somebody who's like really kind of like immune to being grossed out by body stuff, or are you somebody who recoils?
Well, I'm a mom, so I feel like I have a super high tolerance, where like after a while, like human stuff kind of stops like like bothering you. I also worked in like a blood lab for a while, so like blood, like all that stuff doesn't bother me. You see people, like if you see patients like pass out and you see people go through things, right? Like can be scary, but once you kind of see it and you kind of know what to do, it stops becoming like so like freaky in a way. And so I guess maybe to that end, like I do have a pretty high tolerance. There's not a lot like watching horror stuff or like what have you. There's not too much that makes me feel like grossed out or like icky about things. Though I
Not
still like,
not unsettled. You can watch like a horror movie and just like go to bed, no problem?
no, I do feel, well, I mean, some things do really unsettle me. Like some things do unsettle me, but it's like always usually psychological. Like I just watched this found footage movie called The Outwaters, and it's like I mean, it's like a small budget film, but it really was like that was so psychologically unsettling and well done. Like it really did get me.
What's
like,
it about?
It's just about like a bunch of friends that go out to the desert to film like a music video, and then they kind of come across this like I would almost say like kind of an undefinable like cosmic threat, and it's like it almost feels reminiscent of Blair Witch, where you're like, what is it? You know what I mean? You have to kind of watch it to like see, But it was done really well in this way that really got me. And so like those things can be unsettling. Or like the new Evil Dead, like there's scenes in it where I'm like, I cannot actually watch this. Like I have to like it seems so like that, like the depiction of like mimicking gore is too like it is too hard to like see those kinds of things. But it doesn't unsettle me in the sense that like I feel like unsafe in my life or something. I don't know. Whereas like seeing like a giant blob of like daddy long legs that someone pokes and then they turn into like 10,000 little tiny crawling spiders, that makes me feel like weird as shit. Like I don't know why. I'm just like I don't want to be anywhere like near that. It's so weird. Even without being afraid of spiders. It's more just like the legs and
it's
like
the numbers. 10,000
yeah,
is
it's
a
the
lot.
numbers. Yeah. It just makes me feel like weird. So like that, so there's that. But I don't know. I read, and I read a lot. Read like Dennis Cooper and stuff like that. So I don't. Yeah, it doesn't like bother me. I'm more just like in art. It's really interesting to like see those kinds of depictions, like where it takes you.
So along these same lines, but I think connected to something else entirely, are the depictions of food in this novel, which I was often like grossed out by. And it also made me aware of privilege when it comes to food and food choice, and how lack of resources, lack of access to things like farmers markets or Whole Foods or whatever it is something that most people on Earth live with, but a lot of people in the United States don't. They live with this stuff, and I found, and I think it also kind of made me think to my childhood in the Midwest growing up, where people's attention to food is totally different than it is, say, in Los Angeles, where I've spent my adult life, to the point where I think I've become blind to certain things. Like LA is such like a kind of prissy food culture by comparison. but I feel like the choices you were making, hamburger helper. Like what are some of the other like foods that it's like
There's like the government cheese, which is like a big block of like cheap Velveeta, essentially. It's like that American cheese, you know? That's pretty
yeah.
normal. I'm trying to think. When my daughter was born, I was on WIC, and so I was able to get like gallon of milk and like frozen, like the most basic, like frozen veggies, can of beans, pasta, like those kinds of things. You get like a
Dollar
can of
General
tuna.
at like Dollar General, and I don't know. There's just these little
Potted meat is a
details.
big one. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, potted meat. I mean, just like but it's not appetizing. And then there's like a scene later in the book where Dee Dee is at like what restaurant is it? Where she's like really eating a ton, and it's
The
like
Golden
the soft,
Corral.
the Golden Corral,
Corral,
like
yeah.
this, the soft serve ice cream. I'm somebody who is kind of a wuss, maybe increasingly so, but like I'm increasingly grossed out by like hotels, restaurants. I don't think they're clean. I don't think a lot of times the people who work there give a shit because they're getting paid so poorly. So I'm like, no thanks. I'll just eat at home. These people resent you for even being there. They want to go home too. And I know that's not the whole story, but I just found that these descriptions were spot on. And for me, they were like some of the more unsettling parts of the book. I guess maybe I'm grossed out by food more than the average person. But I also found myself laughing because it's like so gross. You're just like, ugh, like whatever it is. It just, but can you just talk about those kinds of choices as they pertain to writing about people, as we've touched upon earlier, who are not well off and who kind of live in food deserts or live in places where there are not, high-end grocery stores available. And even if they were available, a person like Dee Dee couldn't afford to shop there regularly, and so on and so forth. But just your desire and interest in these kinds of characters living in these kinds of places.
Well, I think part of it is that like I've had those experiences like at different times in my life, like my mom buying those Walmart eggs that they're just like anemic. Like the shells are really weak, the yolks are really like pale, like those kinds of like that kind of food. Or like I said, like I was on like women, infants, children, which is like it's like social like welfare when you don't have like a lot of money, that they give you like a set like check per week, and then you can go to a grocery store and get like the WIC approved like foods, like that kind of thing. So it's like you learn how to like make your budget stretch. So it's just like from like living it in a way. Like I have like memories of like going to like the dollar store and like finding food that way, like getting like Vienna sausages, and even like the generic spam. Spam is actual spam is like really expensive to me. But like you would find like you just figure out like how to make your budget stretch and like make stuff work for you that way. You know what I mean? So it's just like based on those experiences. Like I also, I mean, like as a teenager, like I had an eating disorder, so I've always been fascinated by like the sensory details of food too, right? Like you describe it, right? Like the eating it as like gross in a way, and there is this, not that I think food is gross, but for me, food is just that big sensory thing. Like I've had moments in my life where I'm like literally binge eating, and I know what those things feel like those experiences. And so I just think like I wanted to like share, kind of share that a little bit in a way. Yeah, I don't know, but yeah, just I think that's part of it. Is like the food thing is like you have to learn how to make like a budget stretch. There's a period of time where when I was working at Starbucks, my partner and I were like literally living like 80% off of expired Starbucks sandwiches. Because that's what I could get from work, you know what I mean? Like they were going out of date, and you like they would, give them to you. And I've always kind of done that. Like when I worked at a grocery store, it was like, what can we take home that's expiring? Maybe that the manager's not going to notice, but like assistant manager thinks it's okay, for you to take home or like what have you. You just figure out what you can do, like when you have to survive. You know what I mean? Like things are more obviously things are more stable now, but it's like you just kind of learn, like you learn to use your resources in that way. Or finding like food pantries, like you have limited options at food pantries, and so you figure out what they have, and you figure out how you can make like those kinds of like meals work, right?
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, so just like yeah, like kind of living it in a way, and it can be hard. I think it's hard. What I've seen is that it can be really difficult for people with like multiple children, like in communities and stuff, because then you really have to think about like how are you going to feed like 5 people in one night, because that's 1 week of food for one person is one family for one day, right? Or not like a whole week, but just like one meal, right? You know what I mean? So you have to think about like how you make that stuff stretch. So things like hamburger helper, or like the off-brand versions of it, like a pasta kit, like a tuna pasta kit, like those things are all really crucial for keeping people fed, but they're not
Yeah.
always like the most nutritious, and that's the hardest part, is like trying to balance that like nutrition, especially for like little growing kids and stuff.
Yeah, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
And on a different note, this is
Mm-hmm.
a novel that is interested in the spiritual life, and in particular the spiritual life of this region in rural Missouri in the Ozarks. The Pentecostal church plays a big role in this novel. Dee Dee was raised in a family mostly by her mother. Her father passed away from cancer, right? It's cancer.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And was raised in one of these very religious households and in a particular church that I think in many ways shaped her worldview and her expectations for herself in the world.
Mm-hmm.
Like it really kind of put a frame on existence for her. Is that
Mm-hmm.
accurate?
Yeah, I think it is accurate, especially when it comes to like her relationship with Sloane, who's her like teenage crush slash like teenage best friend. Yeah.
And also Sloane is someone to whom she is often compared disfavorably. Sloane is
Mm-hmm.
super pretty, and I think Dee Dee's mother has a particular affection for Sloane that
Mm-hmm.
might in some ways be hurtful to Dee Dee, to have her mom sort of uh, like valorizing and praising Sloane in front of her all the time in ways that she often does not praise Dee Dee herself. So
Mm-hmm.
that's a very complicated relationship at the heart of this novel, this relationship between Dee Dee and Sloane. Also the relationship between Dee Dee and Mama, her mother. That's
Mm-hmm.
not an easy relationship either. And this sort of triangle of female relationships in the book are definitely shot through with these spiritual concerns and with the church itself. I mean, the Pentecostal church is kind of a binding thread between all three of them. I think we talked the last time you were on this show about your spiritual upbringing and especially your time in Colorado Springs, which is a very right-wing Christian town. It's like where
Mm-hmm.
Focus on Family is. And I'm curious to know about your experiences with the Pentecostal church, which
Mm-hmm.
is what? Pentecostals like speaking in tongues.
Yeah.
That's what it is. The people are so like possessed by the Spirit of the Lord that they start to like babble and speak in tongues nonsense.
Mm-hmm.
Did you have experience with that growing up, or is this another thing that you set out to research?
It was actually just another thing that I set out to research. Like I did have a lot of exposure to Christianity growing up. It's like especially with Colorado Springs and all of that. And but when I was 13 and I was like, I don't like believe in God anymore. Like my parents were upset. Like my dad was really upset, but nobody forced really anything on me after that. Like in terms of like punishing me for not wanting to like go to church or anything like that. So I was really lucky in that respect. But I don't know. I've always been fascinated by different sects of Christianity and why they believe what they believe. like it's fundamentally like entertaining and interesting to me, for example, that you know, that like some sects of Christianity, like like Pentecostals, will view something like Catholicism as like basically Satanism. Like it's
Wait,
just so wrong.
will view what as Satanism?
Catholicism, like
Oh,
Catholics, as like you know, like that's just like what they practice is so wrong. Or there's disagreements between like the like having one God or like a triune God. Like there's like these a lot of differences in opinion, and these you know the history of it is interesting. That's like I think one of the main reasons why the United States even exists is because they wanted to like break away from I think the Anglican Church and like practice things their own way. You know what I mean? Like it really does drive people, and I'm curious about that. Like I'm not a Christian, but I fundamentally believe that like a ritual is a very like natural emergent behavior that all humans have, and that's why religion exists in all these different ways. Um, and so I just really wanted to I really wanted to examine it. Like I have my own history with like different organized religions. You know, like we were talking, like studied Buddhism on and off for like a long time and stuff like that too. Um, and I think in my own dislike for elements of Christianity, I'm driven to understand it more because if I'm gonna not associate with something, I kind of want to know, like, you know, why, like, you know, the details. Like, reading the Bible is really fascinating to me, examining, like, these different verses or, like, interesting. If I find something to be, like, hypocritical, I want to understand, like, how can I talk about this or defend this argument or, you know, what have you. So that's kind of where, like, it started. Um,
and
and then
can I say,
did research, yes.
okay, and a lot of it is crazy, I have to say. Like, not just Pentecostal. I mean, and this is just me. My view on this stuff, like people speaking in tongues and falling to the ground, and or like the Mormon tablets being found in a hillside, or
Hmm.
even like Jesus like resurrecting. This idea that he like came back from the dead and floated up into the sky. I find this goofy. Am
Hmm.
I being a dick? like, I can't help when I'm faced with this stuff being like, really? Like people believe this? Like it just seems crazy to me. It seems crazy. And yet maybe I'm like judgmental and shut off or something. I don't know. But it seems like I'm happy to have discussions about different perspectives and points of view and rituals and all that kind of stuff. But at a certain point for me, it just gets goofy and maybe like not helpful in the grand scheme of things because people become really attached to these ideologies to the point where they're willing to fight and kill and die for them, or
Hmm.
think that Catholics are going to burn in hell. I mean, it's crazy. No, I mean, I
Yeah.
don't know.
Yeah, I think like it's so complicated because I know there are people who they live their lives in accordance with what they would say are like the values like of Jesus, right? And these are like the actually the good things, right? Like I think in the South, when I mean in the South, I had a lot of Christian friends, and they're like they're doing I guess what are like the works is what they call it, and they won't necessarily like proselytize to you, but what they want to do is like live their lives as an example of a good person, and by doing that, you'll see how good that like you know like that religion is like living your life in accordance with these values, and then you'll want to be a part of it, you know. So it kind of like some of it is like makes sense because like they are very kind, they're very generous. There are a lot of Christians who are not like homophobic or xenophobic or any of those things. Like they have that, and then I think there's this element of Christianity which probably is like the type that somehow you know like the Republican Party and like the and like Christian conservatives kind of like began to link up like in the 80s, and it became really political. And I think those are a lot of people who are like really afraid. I feel like they're losing power. I think there's an element of evangelical Christianity that kind of posits like any attack on the religion as like this is a normal persecution that Christians will face, just like Jesus was persecuted. Like the persecution complex is kind of built in because yeah, Jesus was like literally killed for this religion and like what he believed in, and so that kind of like mixes in with it in terms of like the way that politics and stuff like that are going. So it's like those things like I can objectively look at them and observe them and say like, okay, I can see why people, yeah, like behave this way, even if I don't like agree with it all the time. Because like people are afraid and they want power and they also want to lessen their suffering. And people will do a lot of things to try to lessen their suffering that don't involve examining themselves because that's like the most uncomfortable part. Like there's a lot of that plays into it too. But yeah, I don't know. I know it's hard. I personally don't I feel like there's also a lot of Christian thinking that exists like in the American mind that people may not even realize that they have, like Puritanism, or the way that we like shame people for things that they don't need to be shamed for or something like that. That's kind of like a Christian thing. That's like this idea of like, sinning and stuff like that. So yeah, I know. I don't know. That's where I'm at on it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I think I'm fine with people doing whatever they want to do as long as they don't try to like legislate their morality and impose it upon others. And
Yeah.
they don't hurt people. It's not actively hurtful.
Yeah. No,
but
100%.
I feel like people are in certain quarters of the Christian community actively trying to legislate their morality on the rest of us. And
yeah, I know.
that
And
becomes,
that's, sorry, I don't mean to interrupt, but that's the thing that is so frustrating about it is that like they shouldn't be doing that. Like there's literally separation of like church and state,
well, but they don't want that. There
Yeah.
are people, these are the people I'm talking about who believe that there should be no separation. They want like a theocracy, and that is bad news.
Yeah.
I want to say, forgive me for not having a better memory, but did we discuss last time that you spent 4 years as a Muslim? Like you converted to Islam at a certain point? So, I mean, this is unique. I think there are a lot of people who are like spiritually curious, but like your spiritual curiosity seems to be maybe a little bit more genuine and intense than the average person. Like you've really explored. You study Buddhism. You were raised Christian. How did you convert to Islam?
I went to the mosque and then I said my shahada and then I started going and stuff. But like I initially was curious actually because like I think what happened was I was reading about how they had captured Osama bin Laden and like released his body in the sea, like in accordance with like they were saying like Muslim burial practices. And I was like, that doesn't seem right to me. I don't know. I've never, I was like, I just wanted to research. And so when I started researching Islam a lot more, I was like, this religion seems like interesting to me. Like I was curious about it. It seemed really, like I was reading about like halal butchering practices and I was like, oh, this seems like it works on a level of like harm reduction in a way. I don't know. I was like kind of, the more that I read about it, the more I was like, this is not what people told me it was. Like growing up as a child, like post 9/11, like people tell you like it's so violent or they're the enemy or it's like, it's all about jihad and stuff. And it wasn't really. There was a lot of beauty in it and a lot of reverence. And so I did. I went to the mosque and then I converted and I would pray 5 times a day, went to the mosque every Friday. Eventually, so I converted into a Sunni mosque and then eventually my studies led me to Shia Islam, which I found a lot of like reverence for. It felt a little bit more forgiving and spiritual. And even though through through my years of practice, I eventually hit this point where I was like, I don't think I'm like monotheistic, so I can't practice this religion. Like I'm like that's literally heretical, like after a while, just like kind of learning more about myself and my beliefs and like what I was learning. I still have like a lot of reverence for the religion. Like there was one time, I can't remember the details now because it's been so long, But in one part of in Shia Islam, you do like a 100 cycle prayer, which is, you know, the full like standing and then going down and then standing up again and like saying the particular prayer. You do it in a group. You do it 100 times, and like that was like a religious experience for me. You know, like, you know, sometimes when you, I don't know if you've experienced this, but if you meditate and you kind of like completely lose like all sense of where you are in space, like you're like, I don't have a body anymore. I'm just like this thing, right? Like witnessing or, you know, thinking about consciousness in this like disparate, suspended way. It was kind of one of my first experiences doing that when I was doing this like 100 cycle prayer, which was incredible. Like, you know, it really like, I don't know, it was amazing. But yeah, I eventually just left because there were some things with the community that were really hard because not everyone's progressive, like as progressive, like as I think I would need for a religious community. And, like, yeah, my kind of my belief system was changing a little bit in terms of like how I thought about monotheism and like my wider view of the world. So I was like, maybe it's just not for me. Like, you can't be a practicing Muslim if you don't believe in like one God, you know, like that's the whole basis, you know, more so even than Christianity is like, there's literally only one God. Like there's no Jesus. Like Jesus is a prophet in Islam, but like you don't worship him. Like you only worship Allah, you know? So I was like, okay, maybe I'm just gonna like keep reading and searching for whatever works.
And when you were researching for Deliver Me and you went to a Pentecostal church, what, in Missouri?
Mm-hmm. In Arkansas.
In Arkansas.
Mm-hmm.
What was that experience like?
It was, so I got a little scared because it was like this, it was like a very small, like maybe 10 family church that I found. And it wasn't just Pentecostal, it's specifically oneness doctrine. So they are just, you know, a bit more intense than I would say than like your average Pentecostal believer.
Who are very,
you know?
who to me seem very intense. So to be more intense than that is very intense.
Yeah, yeah. But it was also familiar because I had already like been, you know, consistently in a world where people are there, like the religion is like their life. It is like your whole like life in some ways. And so that part felt almost familiar. Like when I showed up, I was wearing like jeans and like had my face pierced and I'm wearing all black. And like this is a church where like the women wear skirts and they don't wear any makeup and it's very like traditional. But everyone was so kind to you when you show up because like you could be like a newcomer. They want to see how they can, you know, like bring you in and bring you like on the right path and stuff. So everyone is like really kind. But like, yeah, I just wanted to go to experience it, like hear kind of what they had to say, and what it was like. So it was like both familiar and kind of scary, you know, like being outsider, but also kind of being like, this feels familiar to me. Like having like, you know, gone to a mosque and gone through this conversion process and spent my days, you know, like with very religious people. But because you're like in this small town in Arkansas, you're just kind of like, you know, like I'm a stranger and I'm weird. Like hopefully they don't find out that I'm like, you know, that I like women or whatever. Like it's very like, you know, like that gets a little scary.
Well, it's also, I think part of what unsettles me about it is that I feel like this kindness that you feel emanating from these people as they welcome you into the church is transactional. Mm-hmm. Which is to say it's not fully authentic. It's contingent upon this notion of them converting you to their ideology. Mm-hmm. It's not like we love you no matter what. Like, hey, nice to meet you. We're just being kind to be kind. They're being kind with an ulterior motive, right? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and that's one thing that really made it hard to live like in Arkansas for a long time is that for those there's so many like believers, right? Like it's just there that they are kind, but you do start to feel this sense of like, for me, like I can't get to like a deeper connection with a person because like I'm not going to go to like a Bible study. Like I'm not going to like join the soccer team that your church has, you know what I mean? Because like I know you want me to come more into the community, like that kind of thing. And so it becomes like it becomes harder to feel like you have like a deeper. For me, it became harder to feel like I had a deeper, genuine connection with like those kinds of people. I have very deep, genuine friends that do live out there, but they're definitely like not Christian. You know, like they're more like me, like in that respect. So we can develop those deeper friendships. But because that was so common, and you're like living in the suburbs, and I didn't have a car, so I was like in my neighborhood all the time. Like those are the people in my neighborhood. So I was like, yeah, I'm just like I'm lonely. You know what I mean? Like I need like friends and community, and these aren't like that's not my community. You know what I mean? So because it does tend to start feeling transactional.
So you now live in Glasgow, Scotland.
Mm-hmm.
How did that happen? I've been seeing you tweet about this for a while, and I've been wondering, like, what is going on? You just moved to Glasgow?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, my mom's from England, and so I have a British passport. And during COVID, which was very hard for everybody, I just hit this point where I was like, I'm tired of thinking like, oh, well, maybe I'll do this, maybe we'll try, to like leave the country or something like that. I just hit this point where I was like, life is too short. I just need to stop being afraid and try to get over here, even if it's hard. My daughter was coming up on school age. She was like 4 going on 5. And even that, like the idea of like sending her to school, like it was so hard for me to think about, like the people having to do like the like shooter drills and stuff. Like I was just like, I just feel it was so hard for me to imagine like having to experience that like psychologically. So I was like, I just have to figure this out. I have to get over there, just like get a plane ticket, get an Airbnb, and then like, find my job, right? Like work at a grocery store, whatever it was like I would have to do, just to get her over there. So.
And you did it.
I did it. And it's been almost 2 years, which is crazy. The time has flown by really quickly. And it's been great. And there's like an amazing writer community in Glasgow. Lots of art. Yeah, it's been really wonderful. Lots of rain, but I don't mind rain.
Yeah, I mean, and it's been something that you like net positive, and you would envision yourself staying there for a while.
I think so. My dad was in the army, and we moved around all the time. So I never really had a place that feels like home, even though I have like different hometowns that I've stayed in for long periods of time. But like when I walk around Glasgow, I just have this feeling. I'm like, this feels like home. Like that's the thought that runs through my head. Is like, this feels like home. I don't think I've ever really had that experience. So it feels good. Like it feels right. I have great friends. Everyone is like so kind in a way that's not transactional. Speaking of,
good.
Yeah. So yeah, it feels pretty good. So we'll see, yeah. I think though, like I can't envision myself leaving Scotland. Like maybe when I'm old, I'll like retire, like out in the country or something, maybe. But like I love the city, and it's a manageable city. It's not like too big. There's still lots of people, but it's not like super overwhelming, I guess, like it is, like with New York City or something. So it's nice.
So last question.
Mm-hmm.
Are you working on, I guess I think you alluded to this earlier, but are you working on another book?
I am. I'm working on 2 different books, but I'm superstitious and I don't want to talk about what they are. Because if I do, and then they don't get published, 1, everyone will be like, oh, she didn't finish that project. And 2, maybe like I'll dissipate the excitement for it before I've been able to get it out in the world. So novels, fiction, nonfiction? It'll be novels, definitely. I think that's where I live now, is just fiction. Yeah.
You're working on 2 different novel projects.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
No butcher paper on the wall yet.
No, not yet. Yeah, 1 is like, I don't know why, but it's the seat of your pants type of thing. Even though I'm like, why am I doing it this way? Because I was like, I found my method, But the other one I think will be more like that. Like I've already outlined it, so now I'm like, maybe I do need to get the butcher paper and like the strings, do the conspiracy theorist thing. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, listen. great to catch up with you. Congratulations on Deliver Me. It's an excellent novel.
Thank you so much.
Congrats on your life in Glasgow, which sounds lovely. And I wish you all the best on the next 2 books.
I appreciate that. Thank you for having me on.